a co-chair, president of Google EMEA, and he's got a presentation, but I think we're also going to try to wake you guys up a little bit and find out a little of what you're interested in. Google obviously is a company with a lot of interest in a lot of places. So I'm just going to turn it over to Nikesh and let him talk to you a little bit. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Spencer. Good morning, everybody. I think first of all, I'd like to start off by saying a big thank you to Spencer, John, and Maurice and his team for once again putting together a fantastic event. So let's have a round of applause for these guys. Good. And I also want to get your energies flowing a little bit because I can see we should thank MySpace for a wonderful party last night, right? Yeah, there we go. But clearly, the people who had an even better time than us are still in their rooms, and they're having. They should be thanking MySpace even more. So, I have a presentation, but it looks like a lot of you need a little bit of enthusing. People seem to be sort of in their comfort zone. So what I'm going to try and do, and I have my backup, so I don't really fail at this. What I'm going to try and do is start off with questions. So what I'd like you to do for the next 15 seconds is think of some questions that you have as it relates to where you think the world is going, where you think the internet is going. I know it's hard given the constant talk of financial gloom that we've been hearing over the last few days. But as Joe Schondorf said last night, this is clearly an opportunity. This is when the most amount of innovation is likely to come. So it's important. One thing which he said to me when he was sitting next to me, which he didn't say up on stage, was that most of the companies, whether it was Microsoft, whether it was Google, Apple, or a bunch of others, they were actually all conceived and started in moments like this when the world was uncertain and they were trying to figure out what is going to happen. So I think we should see this as an opportunity where we're likely to see more innovation than not. So what I'd like you to do is just think of some of the questions and issues that are going on in your mind, and I'll collect a few and I'll see if I can emphasize those things more in my presentation. Let's start with you, sir. Just stand up and speak. I'll repeat the question if people can't hear.
In 3 days, no one has really spoken about any issues related to the digital divide and how to bring the internet to Africa in the right way. So I thought you might be able to bring some light to that.
Fantastic. Okay. Yes, ma'am. Yes.
I'd like to ask the same question in a more positive light.
Okay.
Having just come from Africa, it seems to me, first of all, having just come from Africa, they're on very much the positive side of the digital divide in terms of their cell phone growth and utilization, number one. Number two, this is not a country where people were buying the 22nd dress shirt.
Yes.
So that it's a much less volatile economy in the first place. So is this where the opportunity really is?
Okay. Fair. So, Spencer.
We have a lot of video that we've been seeing, and it's probably the fastest growing pile of data on the internet. It's not very searchable right now in a real sense other than with tags. When is Google going to be able to really search video?
Okay, so some questions around video and its future, some questions around the digital divide. Sir, in the back.
Hi, a question on, because of the great work that Google's done across a broad range of products, particularly search, but because of the great work that you guys have been doing and bringing great products to market, in a lot of places, Google is becoming a de facto monopoly. And what are the...
Can you mean consumer's choice?
But by the choice of the consumer.
Yes.
But I guess the question I had was, what are the implications of that for Google in terms of the future and sort of the internet more broadly?
Okay, fair question. The quick one answer is more responsibility, but I'll elaborate on that, sir.
I saw the other day that Larry Brilliant started using the resources of Google to track flu and early warning symbols. Clearly, healthcare issues are overwhelming most countries. And how far can Google be a facilitator in addressing this from an automated
Great. So the role of technology and the ability to parse through various amounts of data and information to see how we can do positive things for the world, whether it's trying to bridge the digital divide or the healthcare, with respect to healthcare as a specific issue.
Good morning, Lisa Sonia from Doppler, Helsinki and London. In the real world, 85% of the retail money is spent by women. So I would like to hear how you can get more women to spend money on the internet.
I think more women are spending money on the internet, but
More details, please.
okay. All right. Is that a good start?
You got enough. Go.
Okay, we got enough. All right, so what I will try and do is, I still have a presentation, so I'm still going to try and work through it. But as I'm working through it, I will try and emphasize what you guys have talked about as it relates to video, as it relates to the digital divide, as it relates to healthcare, and as it relates to how do we have more responsibility since we have more consumers choosing us. That other word I don't understand. So, like, I think before we talk about where we're headed in the future, I think it's important to level set and try and get everybody to the same place in terms of how did we get where we got to. And if I look around the room, I think none of us are those millennials which Joe Schondorf was talking about last night, although looking at the people at the Moods Disco, I did feel some of you were still millennials, but we won't go there. I think what is important to understand is where do we get here? I still remember days where, now I'm going to look at 5 different trends. I still remember days when I had to go to the library. The way I consumed information was to go through the library, to go sift through huge amounts of data, to go through archives and try and figure out how I get what I wanted. And now today, at the click of a button, it's very easy to go out there and search for information in a relatively quick and easy way. I think ComScore said that about 2 billion searches happen a day. Now, that's the way we all are beginning to consume information, which puts a huge onus on us, and which, what has happened in the last 10 years is tremendous amounts of data, tremendous amounts of information has been digitized and made available out there. And that allows us huge opportunities going forward to be able to sparse that data, look at it to see how we can try and look at trends. As the gentleman just mentioned, last week Google announced we are able to parse this data, and based on people's searches, we are able to tell you, where it is there likely to be an epidemic of flu going forward based on looking at the data. In fact, another interesting anecdote was if you went back and searched Google Trends, you could pretty much predict in which state in the United States which party was likely to do better and how many seats were they likely to get, purely based on people's search behavior in the US election. So there's fascinating applications of technology in terms of the world of information. But 10 years ago, if you had gone back and seen where we were, it would be very hard to fathom we will go to a world where information would be consumed in a totally different way and huge amounts of information would be available. If you go to the next trend, which is communication, I spent a reasonable part of my life working in the mobile industry. And I remember when I started, probably about 10 years ago, I read a report by a very esteemed consulting company which said the amount of minutes that people consume on the phone seems to be enough. And they didn't think that more than 2% of the world's population would have a mobile phone. It's a very reputed company. Their prediction was there's a phone box, there's a phone in your house, there's a phone in your office. Why would I need a mobile phone and carry it around as a piece of brick that was so heavy? Why would I even bother to do that? Clearly, they seem to have gotten that wrong, but that doesn't stop them from being paid lots of money to continue to consult in that space. But 3.3 billion mobile phones around the world, heading towards 4 billion. And most of the people, as it relates to information and communication in sub-Saharan Africa, seem to be getting their information and their communication more from mobile phones as opposed to PCs and laptops and desktops, which we all seem to be carrying around. So, huge trend in communications. The one big technological innovation that happened in a large financial services company I used to work for 10 years ago was the head of IT came up to us and says, I have great news for you. This was 1998. He says, you can send email to people outside the company. I don't know how many of you remember 10 years ago where it was very hard to be able to send emails outside a company. He said, but be careful. Don't download any files because we only have 10 megabytes of bandwidth. And if you download any files, you'll bring the entire network down. That wasn't that long ago. That was 10 years ago. I just seen people sitting here with Wi-Fi giving demos using websites and video without having to think about it. But 10 years ago, we were all sitting there and saying, oh my God, this is really hard. How am I going to do this? So it's just fascinating how we take it for granted, but things move along in 10 years, and sort of, it's hard to predict going forward. Spencer talked about television. 10 years ago, maybe slightly longer, 20 years ago, when I lived in India, we used to have one television channel. One. I remember going to my aunt's house and waiting in her living room for 6 p.m. because that's when the local programming would begin. And 6:30 would be a hugely popular program which they showed Indian movie songs, which is a big craze in India, as you can imagine. But between 6 to 6:30, we had to watch a program on agriculture before we got to 6:30. Now just imagine the advertiser's dream, right? I mean, you didn't need a media company to do media allocation. I'd like to buy TV, fantastic. One channel, fantastic. From 6 to 9, you have 6 television slots. Now let's go bidding. Right? That's a wonderful done. Now I have 500 channels in my house in the UK, and I still don't know what to watch. But if you look at where that's come from, I mean, from that point in time, we've come to a point where 28% of the people in Europe have claimed to have watched something on the internet or YouTube or various video things that we saw almost every day. The average amount of video uploaded to YouTube is 13 hours of video every minute. Probably a lot of that has an audience of 1, but still there's tremendous amounts of video being uploaded. And the way people consume entertainment has changed. I think Mark Thompson was here yesterday. The BBC iPlayer has, on an average, has 500,000 views a day. So people are watching 500,000 programs a day on the BBC iPlayer. So there's tremendous amounts of sort of shift in the way people are consuming entertainment as we go. If you look at commerce, to the lady's point, to ask the question about lots of women spending money on the internet, 85% of the internet users have claimed that they've bought something online. Do you guys remember 10 years ago? How many of you had bought something on the internet 10 years ago? Clearly, I know, so you have. But I was very apprehensive buying something 10 years ago because I was scared that these guys will take my credit card data. I don't know whether I'm going to get what I'm ordering. I'm not sure if they're going to deliver it. I'm not sure who these guys on the internet are. I think right now we've all in this room bought enough on the internet. In fact, 85% of people in the world claim they bought something on the internet. So clearly we're seeing this huge trend as it relates to commerce and community. And we all a lot of us went to a party with MySpace last night. 10 years ago, it would have been unfathomable to understand that there was going to be this tendency where people would wake up in the morning and log on to see what their friends have said, and they'd spend 45 minutes on an average in a day logged on to something called a social networking site. And Facebook has 100 million social networkers who are active. These are not people who've created a profile and gone away. These are people who actually go there at least once a week. 100 million people. And again, you sit there and say, well, that's interesting, but how long is this going to last? I think it's going to last forever. Because I still remember, I left my undergraduate school 20 years ago, and I didn't bother with this whole social networking thing for a long time. Until 2 years ago, a friend of mine from my class in undergraduate wrote to me saying, we've all created a group. Unfortunately, it wasn't a Google group. They created a Yahoo group, but that's okay. We all created a group. We'd like you to join it. And for the first time after 18 years of leaving my school, I actually was able to reconnect with 38 people I went to school and I spent 4 years with. And if you all go back, we all remember that all those wonderful memories we had from our childhoods, from where we lived, whether the school we went to, and we just haven't connected with those people. But this allows us the opportunity to go back and connect. So suddenly, meeting people on the internet is no longer a bad idea. It's not just the act of the desperate. You won't go there. All right, so the point I'm trying to make is we tend to overestimate the impact of technology in the short run and underestimate the effect in the long run. I remember moving to the UK 8 years ago, and I'd moved from the US. Working in technology, I have to admit, I didn't quite understand that you couldn't bring your VCRs and your music systems from the US and make them work in the UK. As you can imagine how myopic my point of view was, given I lived in the US for 10 years. But when I came over here, I had 3 new VCRs, which I had brought over, and I was trying to make them work. The first one blew up. That gave me the idea, don't try that same thing with the second and third. But it made me very angry and frustrated, so I decided I was going to leapfrog and not buy another VCR 8 years ago when I moved to the UK, and I bought myself a DVD player. I went to my local video store, and I tried to rent a DVD. They had this really small rack in one corner where you could get one of 50 DVDs, and they're probably about, on an average, 6 months old. Right? And everything that was new was on tapes. We're 8 years later. If I go to that same store, I don't think they have a rack for tapes. Had I asked any of you 8 years ago, what do you think about this DVD technology? And what about VCRs? And it's sort of, highly unlikely any one of you would have said that, oh, VCRs are going to go away in the next 5 years. Take this with digital cameras, right? I see people clicking. Just imagine if I took away your cameras and said, you're no longer allowed to use digital cameras. You have to put the roll in, you have to take the pictures, you have to get them processed, and you have to then go back and look whether you like the picture or not. Can you imagine that? It sounds so backward. We all did it for many years. So it's just very hard. It's very hard for us to sit down and stop and think and say, what is going to change in the next 10 years? Now, last night Joe said to me, he told the story about DEC and Ken Olsen about how DEC sort of said there is no role for PCs in the future. We're wasting our time. We know what happened to DEC. So I run the risk right now trying to make predictions in the future and then being reminded by somebody perhaps 10 years or 5 years later saying, what an idiot you were trying to make that kind of a prediction. So as you can tell, I'm not going to try and make a prediction, but what I'm going to try and call out is a lot of these changes we have seen, a lot of the changes we have seen on the internet have been driven by technology. So I'll try and pull out 2 or 3 trends that are happening in the technology space which are likely to drive a change in the way we see the world. And the 3 big technology trends that I see, and somebody alluded to this last night, I think Joe did, living in the cloud. A lot of our information in the future is going to live in the cloud. And you sit there and say, well, that's interesting. Why do you believe that? I think we've come to a point where it's become irreversible. And there are three reasons why that's likely to happen. One, we are in a world where we all believe in the ubiquity of access in the Western world, not in the sub-Saharan African world yet, or the Middle East. But wherever you go, even you're sitting in this room, you believe that you will get access to wireless broadband wherever you go, whether it's through your data card, whether it's through Wi-Fi in a place like this. We're beginning to believe that, and the more we go on, the more likely it is going to be universal truth. So if I believe that I can be connected from wherever I want, they're talking about those things on airplanes. They're talking about, I read something yesterday that you can have a Wi-Fi router in a car, and Chrysler is testing I don't know about how long the auto companies in the US are going to last, but they are testing Wi-Fi routers in cars lately. So clearly you will see, we will continue to see this notion of ubiquity of access. There's a huge democratization of the tools of production going on. So everybody who has access to a phone now effectively has access to the ability to create videos and pictures at any instant they'd like to. So if you look at those trends, and if you look at the fact that people are more and more comfortable letting their data reside away from them because they want to access it based on convenience. I was trying to show somebody, I was in Spain 3 weeks ago, and I was trying to show somebody pictures of what pictures I took in Spain. And I was able to take out my Android phone, the Google phone, or you can do that with an iPhone, you can do that with a BlackBerry too. I was able to access my Picasso web album and actually show them pictures I'd taken in Spain. That would have been impossible if I had them lying in my house in a folder, or that would have been impossible if I had them on my PC only. So again, things like that, our ability to access our email for the last 5 years at the tip of at our fingertips, all these things are going to make us go towards a world where we're likely to live in the cloud, which is going to change the way we consume data, which is going to change the way we look at our applications. The second big trend I see is the notion of being an open and collaborative world. And I don't think, as business people, as technologists, we have fully understood the impact of that phenomena. What has happened is a traditional model, and model of people in the room, in the past has been you hire a lot of programmers, put them in a secluded location, let them program and write millions and millions of lines of code, and then come out 2 or 3 years later and say, voila, I have a new product. And by then the world has moved on, society has moved on, but because some of them may be a monopoly or some of them may be consumer's choice, I don't know, but it's just we get stuck with lines of code and pieces of software which are very hard to use and very complicated and designed for a user who was in that secluded location with the programmers for a long time. The world today is a world where we actually do product development overnight. You put the lines of code in. Tomorrow morning, you put it out on the web. People test it. People use it. By the afternoon, you have feedback. And by the evening, you're redesigning it. And if you haven't done that, as long as you have sort of open source code, you actually have other people in the world while you're asleep who are redesigning it and posting to it. And then you can sit down and choose the best of it. And that's not quite understood. And I'll give you some examples in the media world slightly later where this is also beginning to happen in other walks of life. This is not just sort of restricted to technology and our ability to do it there. Most recently, we open sourced 8 million lines of code with Android. So any developer out there who wants to write applications or who wants to modify the Android operating system for Google can actually do that. The benefit of that is we get the collective intelligence of everybody around the world. We don't believe we're the only place where good engineers work. We believe there are great engineers everywhere in the world. And if we can open that source and are willing to share, there's a higher probability that everybody is going to try and contribute towards that event. That's beginning to happen in healthcare. That's beginning to happen in technology. That is even beginning to happen in media. And last but not the least, I think what's likely, it's going to be very hard for businesses to survive in the future without having a technological backbone. If I just saw a bunch of the presentations slightly earlier, there were at least 3 of them on news. Now, can you imagine, they were talking about clustering and putting news stories and ranking them automatically with robots without having to sort of get involved and providing sort of the back end to Sky News and the back end to the Huffington Post or the USA Today, et cetera. These are newspapers. These traditionally did not have to do so much with technology. But even a newspaper, you just saw, has to go back and rethink about how their process needs to work to be able to make it easier for technology to enable them. So what we're going to see in the next 10 years is a very high propensity for businesses and for other people to have to rely on technology as a backbone. So how's life going to be different? So rather than try and predict something, I just took 3 different scenarios, and I'll try and share the 3 scenarios with you. The first scenario around information. I think the big change we're likely to see in information is we have the problem. Last year, 80 exabytes of data were created, which is lots of data. It's like huge amounts of data, right? So if we wanted to watch 1 exabyte of data on TV, it would take us 40,000 years. So you can multiply that with 80, right? Before that, in 2005, 5 exabytes of data were created. So the pace at which we are creating digital data is going up tremendously. So we might run into a problem where it's not like the information doesn't exist. The problem will be we have so much information out there, we just don't know how to find what we're looking for. Right? So one of the big trends, I think, one of the big changes we're likely to see in the world of information is that you will start getting more and more contextual, more and more information that will be filtered and sort of designed and try and anticipate what we're trying to look for, as opposed to huge amounts of information which we have to go proactively search for. There's lots of work going on, whether it's at Google or different parts of the world, that the way we consume information is going to be very, very different. The second big change I think that's likely to happen in information is the visualization of information. You just saw a trend just now from somebody from Daylife who was showing that you can visualize information slightly differently. If you think about it, we have a product where we're trying to map the entire world. So I'm sure a lot of you have used Google Earth or Google Maps. And now we've got cars driving around which are taking pictures of streets so you can visualize information. But I still think those are still building blocks. Somebody aptly said, pictures worth 1,000 words. So just imagine the amount of pictures if you could just take all the words we have and at least reduce the amount of information by 1,000, right, if you follow that logic. But we're going to see a lot more information which will be visual. A lot of it will be understood visually. So you're likely to see that trend happen in the information world. I'm going to show you a quick demo on an iPhone, I think.
So, say you're watching Pirates of the Caribbean. Did somebody say calamari? The closest would be...
Okay, I was cheap. I just went to YouTube and found a bunch of pre-formed videos and used them as a demo as opposed to try and create them. It is a credit crunch, of course. It's AT&T, iPhone, Google. See, it's collaborative. Okay, let me go. Let's go to the world of communication. So now you sit there and say, well, what's likely to happen in communication, right? We all know how to communicate. We pick up the phone, we talk to somebody else. We're able to communicate using email, all sorts of instant messaging, et cetera. I think the one big change that is happening in communication, which is going to be a disruptive change, is the world of transliteration and machine translation. So if you all understand translation, has anybody tried to translate something on the web in an auto-translate mechanism? We all have. It's pathetic, isn't it? It's very hard. You sit there and say, which kind of an idiot dreamt this up?
But it's better than my French.
There you go. It's better than your French. Although you've got to be careful. You might be saying really bad things to the guy in the cab. Right? So we tried this in Olympics, in the Beijing Olympics. We had this translation tool on the iPhone, and it was very hard. What's happening now, there never was so much computing power that you could do contextual translation and make it available on the fly. But the amount of computing power has gone up tremendously. So the next wave of translation we're likely to see is where instead of using a dictionary translation that you do a word-for-word translation, at Google Books we're digitizing millions of books on an annual basis. What is likely to happen is you will actually be able to translate full sentences. So what we'll have, just imagine, the same sentence appears in 60 different books. The book is available in Chinese and in English. So purely based on computing, you're able to understand that this sentence must mean this, because 60 times when somebody translated the sentence, 50 times they translated it to this, which is actually intelligent human translation, right? But you can't get a human to translate every time I type something in my computer. What you can do is you can go back and look at the huge amounts of translation done in the past. You can compare and contrast and see what this sentence means there and what this sentence means now. Now couple that with voice. And just imagine a world where I pick up the phone and I call Maurice, and Maurice speaks French and I speak English, but the technology will adapt that over time, I'll be speaking in English in my phone, and somewhere in the cloud, that translation will happen into French, convert it back into voice, and maybe even my voice, and go back to Maurice in French. Just imagine having that conversation real time. It's possible. It's 10 years. 10 years is a long time. If that happens, there are 69,000 languages in the world. And the biggest problem we have is still communicating with people who do not understand our language. I was just talking to the gentleman in the back, and he says, don't touch the black button. I said, what's going to happen if I touch it? He says, it's going to go black. I said, how do I get it back? He said, I don't understand what you mean. Right? So hopefully, perhaps, as this technology evolves, our ability to communicate with each other will be tremendously enhanced. I'll show you a very short glimpse of how this is already possible. So this is actually a live demo of, not a live demo. Okay, I think you get the message. But the point is, this is actually possible today, where we use a translation bot. So if I'm trying to talk to somebody on Google Talk who doesn't speak English, these guys will keep talking for the next 10 minutes. They're actually, no, just kidding, no, they're not. But this is actually possible today. You can actually go in Google Talk and invite a English to French and French to English bot, which will translate what you're typing in one language to the other. So when we can do it on text already today, it's more than likely this is going to happen with speech. And when that begins to happen, just imagine the applications and the way society is likely to change when 69,000 languages can be sort of, transliterated and machine translated on the fly. The last trend, which is a little more believable, is the trend of commerce. I still feel that the whole process of buying, the whole process of credit cards, the whole process of how we maintain our finances, fraud and everything else, is still up for huge amounts of disruption. Fascinatingly, the Japanese have proven to us and showed us how that this is totally different for them. Actually, last night, Maurice was wearing a wonderful tie, and I wanted to be able to point my phone at his tie, and the phone could take a picture and then decide and go back and compare where he bought it, and I'd know where to get it this morning. That's actually possible. There are 73% of the phones in Japan which have QR codes or QR code readers on their phone, where you can actually read what the product is, and then you can go back into the database and see where that product is available across multiple places. You can actually even order that thing on your phone and get it delivered to your house using the phone as a credit card. It's possible. Is it going to happen in 10 years? Probably. But we're going to see huge amounts of disruption in the world of commerce. So, let's see, I think I even have a video.
Hold on a sec. I've been looking for a good pair of these.
Noise-canceling headphones, eh?
Yeah, you don't want to hear half the conversations that go on during a typical bus ride.
I might be willing to listen if I had to pay that much to ignore them.
It does seem high. Let me check something. So they're a little cheaper online, but not really enough to matter.
Hey, a buck's a buck.
True, but I'm gonna check one more thing. See? There we go. There's a store called RJ's selling them for about $20 cheaper.
Nice. So you making the pilgrimage today to buy it? We've got a movie to catch.
Actually, it's just on the block. Keep walking. I'll call and see if they have a pair in stock. We can still make the show.
Your treat, right?
How you figure?
Hey, you're the one who just saved 20 bucks.
So it's possible. This is an example where we've demoed this actually works with the Android phone. Somebody else, a third party, designed the application. We didn't. But it's possible as we go along. So I thought I'd just paint a few scenarios and have you guys thinking about what could happen and how this is going to impact us. Because we're at the media forum, I'm going to take a quick few minutes and talk about how this is likely to impact our world in media going forward. So going to 4 quick trends. The first one, for me, I think it's a fallacy and a misnomer to think about the internet as something different. If you go back 5 or 6 years, a lot of our businesses used to have internet departments. So the guys with long hair and glasses who you couldn't take out to customers used to work. And these were the internet whiz kids, and they were different from the rest of the business. Today, those guys actually wear suits and ties, as you can see, and they're actually allowed to go out and speak and talk to customers. So clearly, we've done some degree of integration with those people in the business side. However, we still in the media world treat internet advertising as something different. We say, well, that's digital advertising, which is different from the way traditional media is. And sometimes we pray those guys will go away. Unfortunately, they're not likely to. What's beginning to happen is, I think the reason we make that mistake is, what we don't realize is, actually the world of advertising is advertising around video content, advertising around audio content, advertising around text, which is what print and newspapers is, which is what television is, which is what radio is. And as the internet starts to distribute that content, as people start watching video on the web, as people start listening to radio on the web, as people are consuming text on the web, advertising will follow the audience. So I think the way to think about the internet is it's a distribution mechanism for all kinds of media, and advertising has to be equivalent on both forms of media. And I think the internet advertising is about 8% of the total spend in the advertising world. But I actually don't think that matters, because I think in the next 10 years, we're likely to see 50% of the content distributed using the internet. Now, what does that mean in terms of how much money gets transferred from offline media into online media? I don't know. But what it just means is that we have to start thinking of media in a more integrated way and start treating the internet as a mechanism of distribution as opposed to something different from our traditional offline media as we consider it. The second big trend is around personalization and interactivity. I know Mark was here yesterday. But we are beginning to see more and more personalization. People are watching what they'd like to watch. We've talked about the iPlayer. We talked about drag and drop channels, et cetera. So lots of personalization is continuing to happen. And we're also seeing a lot of interactivity. I'll give you an example. Have you seen this movie, Snakes on a Plane? Have you heard about this movie? Yes? Clearly not a very popular movie, as I can tell from the audience. But do you realize Snakes on a Plane was the first movie where they actually put up the plot on the internet and they allowed other people to collaborate and give them ideas on how the plot should change. There's another one called A Swarm of Angels, where you can pay $50 and you're allowed to contribute your ideas, and they will actually collect all your ideas, and sort of it's called crowdsourcing. So actually collaborating to create a movie using crowdsourcing. They have 2 scripts underway, which they're going to create based on inputs from different people around the world. So I don't know, this is an experiment, we'll see. I think BT ran an episode where you could have a choice of 269 different endings, depending on how you interacted with the program while you were watching it. So clearly, there's lots of interesting experimentations going on. But I'm going to show you a case of personalization, which sort of, I think, falls somewhere between personalization and advertising, which I thought was the most fascinating piece of viral marketing I've ever seen. Let's see.
U.S. elections are always close, but the nation was shocked Tuesday night to see John McCain defeat Barack Obama by a single vote.
We sure showed them what a comeback looks like.
For many, shock soon turned to outrage as the New York Times revealed the identity of the particular non-voter responsible for Obama's loss. In just a few short days, this private citizen has become a national pariah. Fearing retribution, local police took the non-voter into protective custody yesterday at City Hall. Disgruntled citizens have been demonstrating ever since.
You're supposed to Barack the vote, but what happened? The vote didn't even get Baracked.
I waited in line 5 hours to vote with an arthritic hip, and this mother lazy couldn't get out of bed in time to vote.
International reaction has been just as intense, even in some of the most remote locations.
यो मेरो अनुभवमा यो 2-4 सालभन्दा अहिले 5वटा पकडी फुट्यो.
However, the non-voter has become a hero to a small sliver of the population.
I thank you for your service. I thank you for what you've done for the United States of America.
Bet that guy is a factor viewer. He's also a patriot.
Coming up, how long until we nuke Iran? Experts say it could be as early as Saturday, around lunchtime.
That thing was sent to me by a friend. It has a very simple interface. I could type the names of 6 different people and send it to them and actually customize this to the next person. Right? That's the most fascinating piece of personalization and marketing I've ever seen. And in the end, it says, there's a message saying, don't forget to vote. But that's what you can do with this technology. That's what you can do on the internet, which you cannot do in traditional marketing and traditional advertising. Now, if you take that concept and apply it to all the different ways we do interactivity and we do advertising, I think there is something there. Okay. The third trend, which is the issue, I think the big shift that's going to happen on the internet and with all this media we're talking about is traditionally media, you know, there's a curve. You know, content is important. It is important. It is going to be there. We are going to have to pay attention to content. But over time, what's going to happen because of the internet is you're going to start monetizing content more and more through sponsorship and advertising and less through subscription because it is a mass market game. And that shift is going to happen over our lifetimes. And last but not the least, I think one of the challenges we're going to face, at least in the short term, is because we had our rules pretty much defined in the world of traditional media, we were able to look at the creative side and the media side slightly separately because you say, here's television, go design an ad for television. We all understood what television was. I don't think we quite understand what internet media is all about yet. Your campaign on MySpace has to look very different from your campaign on Facebook, from your campaign on YouTube, or from your campaign on, you know, the Guardian's website or the Financial Times website. So I think what was beginning to happen in the internet world is we have to bring the creative and the media people back together to go ahead and design campaigns and focus them in the context of the user as opposed to think about them as two discrete businesses or two discrete units. So that's one big change we're going to see again that is going to be spurred by this technology and by the evolution of the internet. So with that, I still have not answered Esther's question and your question on the healthcare issue, and I still haven't answered the question on the monopoly or consumer choice topic. I think at Google, you know, let me not say at Google, I think the entire internet industry has a challenge. And the challenge is the internet industry has not been there for long enough. So consumers, regulators, governments are still trying to figure out what this borderless world means. What happens when I could construct borders, charge VAT in my country, I could regulate the flow of information and services from the borders. But now with this borderless notion of the internet, how do I find a way that I create some form of regulation or some ability to control? And that's why you see a lot of conversation around copyright, a lot of conversation around privacy, and all these things. Now, as Joe said last night, the millennials are a lot less concerned about this notion of privacy than our generation is, which is not my excuse to say let's not worry about it. But I think we're going to have to rethink the rules of what this future world means. And in that future world, it is very important for existing internet players to not abuse the privilege and the right that they have, that users trust them, they're giving them their data and access to data. So as Google, we have to be very responsible. A lot of other internet businesses have to be very responsible with the data that they get from consumers, because if we abuse it, then we run the risk that the consumers won't like us, the users won't like us, they'll go over to somebody else. If we abuse it, we will get huge amounts of regulation coming down us because somebody's going to say, we told you so. I think that the parallel I use is the credit card industry. For the last 30 years, we've all used credit cards. They actually have a lot more information about us than we even stop to think about. But we trust them because they don't abuse that data. And I think that's what we're going to have to do on the internet side, and even be more responsible to try and make sure that we don't have a revolt on the consumer and the government side. As it relates to Esther's question on the digital divide, I think what's fascinating is, as we've seen in society, as people have more and more access to information, good things happen in society, right? And every time we talk to people in Africa or you get into any conversation, the first thing they will tell you is, don't give me your money. I do not want your charity, right? I want you to empower me so that I can create businesses, so I can create sustainable development in the region, so that allows for society to develop. So the things we want to do in that regard is we want to make more and more information accessible to people in different parts of the world, which is not the predominant language and not the predominant culture on the internet. So, you know, there's 2% of the internet content is in Arabic, 2%. And there are 300 million people in the world who speak Arabic, which is 5%. So if there's a way using translation, using investments in technology, using investments in infrastructure, we can bring up that part of the world, whether it's Africa or it's the Middle East, I think we will create more information and access to more information, and that hopefully is a better thing longer term for society. In terms of your question on healthcare, we're still sort of dipping our feet into it to see how we can impact that in a more positive way. As you can imagine, there's way more regulation around healthcare than around anything else, because clearly it's a sensitive topic, and if you get one thing wrong, you can impact lives of hundreds and millions of people. So I think with the development that is going to happen, as Joe said, on gene tech, some of the information parsing capabilities that we have, hopefully we should be able to make more progress in that direction, but I think we'll have to go gingerly in that direction as opposed to quickly. Okay, I probably have way past my time. Thank you very much for listening. Once again, thank you.
Thank you.